joining today's webinar. My name is Lena Bent. I'll be moderating today's session. Please note that this presentation is being recorded. You may ask questions at any time. Simply enter them into the chat box and the presenters will address them during the Q&A portion of the session. At the end of the webinar, you'll be prompted to fill out a brief anonymous survey. We appreciate you taking a few moments to share your feedback. Today's presenters are Judith Kulich and Jay Lichtenstein. Judith and Jay are two key principal thought leaders in marketing. Judith focuses on early commercial and launch strategy, and Jay focuses on launch strategy through launch and beyond. Please welcome our presenters.
Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. It's great to see so many of you from across the industry on the line today. I see the numbers still coming in. Jay and I work closely here at ZS, guiding clients across the industry in early stages of product development through to navigating effective launches and maximizing brand success. Early last year, we quickly leapt into helping our clients adapt launch strategies and tactics around the changing pandemic environment and all of the challenges and hurdles that came along with it. Many of these best practices admittedly weren't entirely new. Some of them were trends and direction we were seeing the industry going already, but COVID certainly was an accelerator and certainly lit a fire under us to really force us to change and make and do things differently. Now, finally, we're in a position of being able to start to see the forest through the trees and actually look back at what organizations have done to get their products off the ground and launch successfully, even in the midst of this pandemic. What we found is those who were able to do so still saw successful early adoption and commercial success. And so we'd like to share some of those stories and some of those best practices as you think about how you can launch this year, next year, and in the years ahead. So before we begin, let me just pause and say, I know this is a big, meaty, and obviously very important topic, and we only have 30 minutes here today. Our hope is that this webinar will give you a few good insights and thoughts to get you started and get you thinking, but 30 minutes won't get us too far. And of course, as always, we're happy to continue the conversation after today. So with that, let's go ahead and jump right in. All right, so to start off, we just wanted to share a bit of a look back. So, you know, at the early days of the pandemic, early first quarter last year, there was a bit of an, immediate expectation or reaction that things would slow down. And actually that the FDA itself would be so overwhelmed that drugs and new drug applications would move through the regulatory process more slowly. But we really didn't see that. In fact, some drugs were, approved ahead of schedule. And if you look at number of drug approvals in 2020 versus 2019, the number's actually up and it's quite consistent with past years. What you do see is a drop in drugs actually launched. So if you look at this 40 versus 53 versus 62 in past years, there is more of a gap there. Sure, some of those drugs were approved in December, late in the year, and are still kind of getting themselves organized to launch this month or next month or early in the year. But there is a more meaningful gap there than we've seen in the past. And so there are organizations that are actually choosing to wait, or this hesitancy to launch amidst the COVID pandemic. That said, in an analysis comparing launch performance to analyst expectations, if we go on to the next slide, we do actually see that many products were able to launch effectively. Just to ground you here in terms of what you're looking at, the full picture shows launches in 2020 through the end of the year. The reds, yellows, and greens were those for which we could find data to compare kind of a meta-analysis of analyst expectations versus actual launch performance in their early days. So, 1 quarter, 2 quarter, 3 quarters, depending on when in the year they launched. We don't have that data for all, but we do have quite a good sense. And if you look actually here, those in the green were able to exceed not only 120%, but I think they're all at least 150% of pre-launch forecasts. One other quick call out here is those are pre-launch forecasts prior to COVID. So we didn't let people cheat and kind of adjust forecasts and then look at how they compared, but they were actually pre-COVID forecasts. Sure, many of those are on the right. Many of those are higher severity, higher unmet need diseases that did outperform forecasts. But you do see a mix here, and so it's not only about the disease or the actual product, but it's also about how they launched. So before we go on, let me pause and try to engage those of you on the line in a quick poll. So let me ask, if you look at this chart, how would you guess that this compares with similar analyses conducted in past years? We've gone ahead and pulled up a poll. I see responses starting to come in. We'll just give it a minute for you all to weigh in. Great. I know some folks are still responding, but we are seeing the lion's share. Emily, maybe we can go ahead and share where we're at. You can see where things are shaking out about the same. And that's actually what we have found. Looking at this mix of reds versus greens, it's pretty consistent with what we've seen in past years. What I will say is those spreads or those margins is somewhat greater. So if you read the fine print here, those that exceeded forecast expectations were often very well above, and those that didn't, were far below. So we may see that spread has gotten larger, but in the end, that mix between reds versus greens, between the over versus under, is pretty consistent with past years. So how did they do it? How did these organizations still manage to launch effectively in 2020? We believe and see that these organizations have really evolved in 5 key areas. And this is what we're going to be spending the remainder of the conversation on today. So these successful launches have evolved in terms of reimagining marketing and promotion, adapting medical and commercial models, transforming digital, expanding access and patient services, and finally measuring and responding with agility. So we are going to dig into each of these. We are going to provide some examples in terms of actual strategies and tactics we've seen. But before we do so, one more poll that'll help us navigate the rest of the session. So we want to hear from you. If you look at these 5 key areas, in which of these areas do you feel least equipped to adapt? Do you feel your organization is least equipped to change? We'll give this a minute. Feel free to select multiple. We want to hear what's keeping you up at night, or what your teams are working hardest on. We will give this one a minute. Well, Jay, this could be an interesting one. I see. I have a sneak peek here, and seeing a pretty even mix.
Yeah,
across.
I think the answer seems like it's all of the above.
Maybe it's all of the above. Maybe we shouldn't have given people the chance to provide multiple.
That's quite telling, though. It's quite telling, everyone.
Great. Okay, we'll pause there, but thank you. And actually, measuring and responding with agility came slightly ahead. But it's interesting. I hope this makes you feel better in terms of you're not alone, and also obviously justifies the rest of the conversation. And these are all pretty tricky. So let's go ahead and jump in. Jay, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Judith. So to transition, we all know, if you go to the next page, Lena, we all know we're going through a big shift, but let's talk about what's actually happening on the ground. In the past, reps worked their way in to see the doctor. They tailored the interactions to that doctor. The doctor was a captive audience. Marketing and other activities were largely reinforcing what the rep was doing, key messages, rep support, et cetera. But all the activities ran through the rep, and it was up to the rep to get the doctor's attention. But now today, we all know what we're dealing with, right? But the key difference is that there's obviously a lot of remote contact, a lot of digital, but now the doctor is bombarded by these things, and you're feeling likely that they're disinterested, they're not engaging. The reason for that, they're not a captive audience anymore. It's so easy for them to say no. It's so easy for them to not opt in or not take the call or not click the link. So the key to success is being able to find that way to engage, and you're going to largely do it while virtual. If you go to the next page. And the key to engaging is to find those things that doctors really need. it's kind of like a foundation in marketing, right? Find those things that they most likely want to talk to you about and focus on those. It seems so simple, but it's very difficult for us, right? Because we spend over the course of, if you go through the marketing and promotions and launches over the last 20 years, we have tended to focus a lot on the promotions that we want to push to those doctors, what we want to say to them. Now we need to still do those things, but let's put it to the side just for a second and first focus on the need to engage. Now, the good news is we've talked to lots of doctors during the pandemic, and they tell us loud and clear, they want to talk to pharma reps. They want to talk to the medical support teams. They want to talk and get help with access and all sorts of things. And we also know through 5 rounds of ZS research during COVID, on the left-hand side of this page, very specific things they want from you. They want help with product samples, with reimbursement and financial support. Telemedicine is still very new to people and they need help navigating. They would like clinical information, specifically around dosing, or remind me things I need to know about this drug. On the right-hand side, this is from a ZS data source called Affinity Monitor. If you're not familiar with that, it's where ZS tracks and measures all of the digital activity that doctors engage in. So we can tell things like what specific emails and content are doctors engaging with? And the answers are on the right. This is what they've been engaging with during the pandemic period. You'll notice these 2 lists look pretty similar. So the emails that they've opened, we're showing email here, during the pandemic tend to be, these are the highest open rates. And by the way, these open rates are kind of like in the 1.5 to 2x and higher. Sometimes they're 7x higher than they were pre-pandemic emails. Things like samples, COVID-19 topics, about their therapy that they care about or what patients might be asking. Patient education, reimbursement support again, clinical information like dosing, product information. These are the things that doctors are telling us loud and clear that they're looking for. If you go to the next page. So now let's get back to those 5 areas that Judith introduced and that we all did that vote on. The first one is around reimagining marketing and promotions. What we're going to talk about, I'll do this page in the next, and Judith will cover a couple as well. We're going to give you guys a bit of the highlights of the best practices of what we're seeing out there and some guidance on what to do in each of these areas. The words that you see on the page, these are from the public domain. These are very specific examples of what companies are doing or folks are talking about that fit against each of these areas, so it's all shareable. But for reimagining marketing and promotion, this means 3 key things. First is establishing a dialogue with the doctor by engaging them on things that we know that they need. So it's things on that previous page. We should be thoughtful about what they might need at that moment. They've got a lot of concerns. They got a lot they're working through. How can we help? Number 2 is educating doctors on key aspects of your product. But those key aspects that are most important given what they're working with COVID and circumstances related to the therapy area, and are they seeing their patients in person or not? So these could be things around, often from our clients we hear, or their client situations, around initiating treatment, thinking about safety, ease of getting one started, ease of management, how to actually get the patient to start, how to support them, and services that you can provide that get that patient started. So rather than focusing on everything, it's those 1 or 2 key aspects that are going to be super important just to get going. But once you get going in the conversation, at this point, you've engaged them. They're starting to think about your product. You're starting to help them because you're meeting their needs. And now you can start to evolve from a single message to be more dynamic, because every doctor will need something different from there forward, need something that they'll need to hear from you, but also need different kinds of support. So you do need to know the combination of motivations that might be driving them at the end of the day. What's their unique considerations by therapy area? Where are they on the trial to consideration to adoption continuum? So you need to be tailoring what you're saying to fit that moment in time where you're having that conversation with a doctor. If we look across a lot of those successful launches that Judith mentioned on the previous page, we do see some big themes. Many of those companies are really focusing around things like safety during COVID, easy ways to initiate. Others we see focused on reimbursement support, or reassuring safe starts during COVID. The examples on the page, ASI launching an online program for its insomnia drug, specifically trying to connect patients with nurse educators, trying to alleviate the burden for the doctors by handling a lot of those questions through this live platform. At Novartis, what they did was they beefed up the physician website. And if you go there and see what they did for their recent launch of Tribecta, you'll see that they covered a lot of those things that we were talking about on the previous page with a lot of success. Moving to the right-hand side of the page, this is around adapting the medical and commercial models. And this means adjusting the ways that we engage our people with our customers. So even though we talk virtual, there's still people involved, right? There's a lot of people that we can still leverage, and I know you all are doing that. But we see a lot of examples of success here. On the medical side, the successes we've seen are around folks that are really leveraging their medical teams to engage more KOLs and engage more doctors, because they are so key to ensure the doctors understand the clinical information, they know the basics of the product, they're clear on dosing, they're clear on safety, they're clear on side effects and how to manage and how to initiate. And these things are all okay for medical folks to talk to the doctors about, and even the office staff. And you'll notice those are the things that were on that previous page in terms of where the key needs were. So critically important. For sales reps, it's really about this new skill that's new for many, but not new in totality, around how to engage remotely, because this isn't new. We see many other B2B sales organizations outside of pharma that have been doing this successfully for years. So at ZS, we've brought that in, and those have been a big part of our training and coaching. And we see a lot of companies doing this too, leveraging best practices around B2B remote engagement that they've been doing for years with inside sales teams. And a couple key learnings that I'll share are tailoring communications around physician preferences. So it's not just what you say, but also how you say it, what you deliver, the length of the call. Are you high tech? Are you low tech during the call? All of these are physicians have preferences. They have ideal ways they want to interact with you. And the more that the rep understands those, they can tailor that interaction, but then also start to tailor the content as we've been talking about. A couple examples on the page. Jazz Pharma added a whole bunch of additional reps. And these reps were really to dovetail on all the information that they were bringing to oncologists and also key opinion leaders. So they were really focused on key sources of key bits of information that they were pushing out. Intracellular, sorry. What we saw them do, and what's again available in some of the press clippings, they really beefed up their ability to engage remotely. So there were a number of activities that were still being done, but all through a remote model, right? So a lot of different ways to engage the doctor, a lot of different ways to engage the staff, but all still connected through this kind of inside sales team, a remote rep that's interacting with them, and a lot of peer-to-peer and sampling kind of activities that were done. And we'll talk more about peer-to-peer interactions on the next page when we get to digital. So why don't we go to that page? And again, I know you're feeling like, hey, tell me more, or I want to see more detail. As Judith said in the beginning, we're only giving you a bit of kind of some of the highlights here just to fit in the time that we have today. But there are, of course, a lot more stories. So digital was, I think, on our vote, it was sort of up there. It was the second area where I think folks could use some help. And this has been a really hot topic during the pandemic. And yes, of course, the key to success is getting more out of digital. But let's talk about what that means. So we've seen in our affinity monitor data, some of this I shared on the previous page, rising engagement in email and web, but we see engagement rates much higher than they were pre-pandemic. But alone, that's still not enough. But if you do get the content right on email, the thing I didn't share on the previous page, some of those points around whether it's sampling, dosing information, key information about the drug, not only is that email getting opened much more so than it was pre-pandemic and driving higher engagement rates, they are getting multiple opens, repeated clicks, and things like that. So the doctors are remembering those emails or even bookmarking those emails or flagging them in some way. So they're going back to them as reference points. Another key area is the peer-to-peer programs, which I alluded to on the previous page. Prior to the pandemic, obviously peer-to-peer programs are a big part of what we do within sales and marketing. As soon as the pandemic hit, we saw peer-to-peer programs basically go down to zero. And they've been slowly ramping back up, and I'm talking about the ones that are not just the big conferences or events. They are true speaker programs, small groups of doctors getting together to hear information about the drug, but also the ones that do this really well are the ones that engage the doctors in conversations with each other. And there are a lot of virtual platforms that many of our clients and we at ZS are tinkering with. We're on a virtual platform right here. Of course, this one is not the best for live interaction. It's all through the Q&A and the And the thing that Judith was doing earlier for the polls, if you were a group of doctors, we'd probably have a lot less of you, but we'd all be live and we would all find ways to talk together and collaborate. We know from talking to doctors, they really miss the ability to collaborate with their peers and share and tell stories with their peers. They're just like us. Like at night, we go home and there's a lot less to do. So if we have programs for them, we see really high engagement. Now, right now, there's only about 1 in 5 pharma companies that are actively doing these peer-to-peer virtual programs. Of course, that number is rising quickly, but the ones that are most successful are the ones that are investing in the technology, that are gearing for an interaction that's not like what I'm doing now as I'm talking to you. It's more of a peer-to-peer, two-way exchange as a key of what we see as success going forward. And another key is around when we think about what the rep is doing or the medical folks are doing and some of these digital activities that we're talking about on the page, is around how companies are orchestrating, coordinating across all of those, across all the interactions and touch points. Since we're remote, it's so important for any conversation that you're having or any direct digital outreach to be connected to other conversations that are happening in other kinds of outreach. So I already talked about a lot of the web and virtual events, but on these 2 examples here, what you're seeing is that SK Life Sciences is doing a really nice job with their digital tools, specifically video conferencing, and using a lot of tools and technologies to engage with doctors one-on-one, but also in these broader groups. What Zeposia did with BMS and through launching of Zeposia, but also even before, they had a lot of ways to engage around, advocacy exchanges, getting multiple groups together, industry experts, leading doctors to share information. That was quite captivating and quite interesting with a lot of success. I'll pass it back to Judith to talk about the last 2 areas on the next page.
Thank you, Jay. All right, we've got 2 areas here: expanding access and patient services, and measuring and responding with agility. So let me dig in here. So if we look at expanding access and patient services, we really see a number of organizations stepping up, and these best-in-class patient services aren't just about drug to patient, patient to drug kind of relationship, right? But they're really more and more about supporting the whole patient and their changing needs in this environment and how that's evolving. There's also an element of not just providing the right services, but making it really easy for those patients to access and engage in those services, often bringing these services and the support directly to patients rather than going through traditional channels, which may be breaking down in today's environment. So a few good examples here. The first one was Seagen and Seattle Genetics. And I think if you took note on the previous slide, Tukaiza's currently shaking out at about 5 times its pre-launch forecasts, so doing quite well. A big part of this is these patient and support services. So Seattle Genetics has partnered directly with a specialty pharmacy to bring Tukaiza directly, ship Tukaiza directly to patients' homes or offices or preferred locations. And keep in mind, this is a breast cancer therapy, right? This isn't a primary care product. And so around that, they're also stepping up. They're providing nurse services. They're providing these wraparound services to make sure that patients who are receiving the drug obviously are well informed and supported in their treatment. Similarly on Ultragenyx here with Dojolvi. So they've been partnering with a specialty pharmacy, not only to make sure that patients have access to the drug that they need, but also the financial assistance that they need. And many patients obviously today are facing significant economic burden and need this assistance more than ever. So it's not surprising as we were reflecting on these that these first 2 examples are from oncology and from rare disease. Certainly these organizations aren't new to patient services, and this has been an integral part of their launch strategy, in the best cases in the past. But the ability to really be able to tap into that experience and then scale up has been really critical to their success. It's also paved the way for others. So we've got a deeper dive on Biohaven. I realize we're running short on time, so let me just touch on a couple of highlights here. Here the example with Nurtec and with Biohaven is the direct delivery of samples and copay cards. But in a later, more robust case study, we also talk about Biohaven's partnership with Cove, a telemedicine provider, and how easy they made it for patients struggling with migraines to engage with telehealth and get access at the end of the day to Nurtec, in some ways circumventing the traditional kind of physician in-person channels, again, that were kind of breaking down in this past year. And then finally, knowing it was of interest to all of you, I want to touch on measuring and responding to agility. With agility. And, these couple of examples here that we've cited, again, based on public information, cite use of virtual detailing, peer-to-peer programs, as Jay was just talking about, being able to be responsive to client demands, and kind of flex and change over time. So Lily here, Ann White, refers to pivoting to activate virtual tactics on customer request. The Vine example refers to tailoring the weight of in-person versus virtual activity based on geographic specific requirements and dynamics. But what you don't see here, and some of the stories we want to tell that we've seen, are leading organizations really equipping local leadership with the analytics and insights they need to flex to their unique and also changing dynamics within their local geographies. And along with those insights and analytics, they're really empowered to make decisions for their local geographies. So in a couple of examples, we see regional leadership with real-time integrated insights based not only on rep information around accessibility of their doctors, but also things like COVID impact on script volume, government data on unemployment rates, account relationship mapping, and traffic flow through alternative sites of care. So if I'm a local leader or, regional division leader, I can act quickly and draw from, these different tools I have in my toolkits based on what's going on in my geography. I can step up reimbursement services if my geography is particularly hard hit economically. I can prioritize relationships with alternative sites of care if patients are moving into alternative infusion centers. I can also get ahead of anticipated shutdowns to ensure continuity of supply of my drug. And finally, in terms of the team themselves, I can adapt local forecasts and make sure that I'm incentivizing and rewarding my team appropriately. So it's not only about having those tools, but kind of having the power and the information to be able to draw the right tools for the right customers at the right time. So I know we're short at time. Jay, I'm going to pass it over to you.
Yeah, team. Yeah, why don't we go page 11 real fast? So Judith and I put together a whole bunch of examples of companies that not just do one of these things, but they do multiple of these things. So this particular one is Biohaven. I wish we had another hour to talk about this. The headline here is that they're doing multiple of the things that we're talking about all at once. Probably the headlines are around the activities that they're doing virtually, the peer-to-peer interactions, really a deep focus on initiation, both helping the doctors initiate, but also patients going to them directly. So with that, let's move to the final page here, page 12, which is really a reprise of the 5 key areas. And again, apologies, we're going fast. I mean, Judith and I have like hours worth of stories to tell on each one of these and a whole bunches of learnings that across our ZS partners and our clients that we're learning. And you guys focused in on measuring and responding with agility and transforming digital. Hopefully we provided some good starting points and guidance there. What I might suggest now is, Yash, if you have a question, from the crew that we could spend our last minute or two of time trying to address.
Yeah, sounds good, Jay. Judith, would you like to take this question around the top 3 tactics you're seeing? Companies
I meant to type in a response, but I'll take it quickly since I said I would answer it live. I mentioned it there at the end. One is obviously adapting who I'm seeing, how I'm seeing, how I'm engaging. So this flexing of live versus virtual, absolutely. The other thing, the reimbursement services I mentioned, stepping up reimbursement services in a specific geography around the payer dynamics, around the account dynamics, around the patient dynamics. So really being able to flex in and provide, and that goes beyond the sales team. That taps all the way back into marketing and, market access and internal HQ functions as well, and bringing the right stuff, to the right customers. And the last one I was going to mention was this alternative sites of care, really figuring out where are your patients today and how can you reach them? It may not necessarily be through traditional, the channels of yesteryear, if you will, but there may be different ways to engage with patients depending on how they're engaging with the healthcare system in their local geography. So Kevin, I hope that answered your question. I know we're out of time. We've got lots more questions.
Yeah, what I might suggest we do is, why don't we formally close right now, so folks have to drop and go to other things. Please feel free to do so. Judith, Yash, and myself will stay on for about 5 to 10 more minutes if anyone wants to hang with us for more Q&A. Lena, do you want to do the official close?
Sure, we'll go ahead and close for those of you who have to jump. Thank you for joining us today. We hope that you found the insights shared valuable, relevant, and actionable. A recording of this session, including the remainder of the Q&A and the slide deck, will be available on demand on zs.com for you and your colleagues to reference as needed. A brief anonymous survey will appear on your screen shortly. We appreciate you taking a few moments to share your feedback. We hope you'll join us for our next webinar, Traits to Seek in a Modern Commercial Operations Platform, on February 10th. And back to you, Judith and Jay, for the remainder of the Q&A.
One more point to Yash, if you have another question you wanted to highlight for us.
Yeah, there was a very interesting
group.
question. Interesting question, Jay, around the burnout from doctors due to virtual and digital engagement, given how much digital content is being put out there. Can you and Judith speak to that?
Yeah, so it's actually a mixed story. The burnout is real, right? They are getting bombarded. They are getting hit with lots of things. They're starting to be blind to it. They're avoiding clicking things and so on and so forth. However, the flip to that is, if your content is geared against meeting their needs, we're seeing the opposite. We're seeing they have higher levels of engagement. They're referencing back to those websites and those emails even more so. If we have like these peer-to-peer interactions, as the one I was trying to shine a bit of a spotlight on a few moments ago, like that one has really high participation rates, really high engagement rates. The other point I'll give whoever is asking the question, I'm sure there are multiple of you who are thinking about this, that we at DS talk to doctors all the time, and we're talking to them about this. And what they tell us loud and clear is they really could use some help right now, right? They could use some support. You know, they're worried about all sorts of things. They're worried about their practice, their own families. They're worried about their patients. They have like these fundamental concerns that they're really thinking about. And the more that we can address those, you will break through. The more that you will broadcast a message on efficacy or something that looks very promotional, not against their needs, they will tune you out very quickly.
Great. Content is king. Thanks, Jay.
The right content, the right content, not just content, the right content. Once you get them hooked, once they're engaging with you and interacting, then you can start to push more promotions.
Great. Horst Endres is making a very interesting point about Germany. I know there were quite a few questions on US versus ex-US. Horst is indicating that in Germany, HCPs actually have to give express consent to receive emails or telephone calls. And without consent, we're not allowed to contact them. So, great.
Yes, but you'll get you'll get the consent if they know you're providing something of value, right? It's so when you ask for the consent or you try and get the consent, but again, it's think about it as you get a couple shots on goal here. When you get a couple shots on goal with their consent, you need to deliver against their needs, or you lose that consent very quickly. And also, if you get consent from some, it helps you get consent from the others because they will chat with each other, right? Like they're still colleagues, and colleagues are still communicating. So those things will help you. But yes, it is an extra hurdle, a pretty big hurdle in Germany, to try and get those consents ahead of time.
Yep. Another very interesting question, Judith, maybe we can start with you on this one. Any guidance to tying the launch methods to sales incentives?
Yeah, it's a good question. I had this very same, I pulled in our incentives lead to get some ideas from him as well. One thing we've seen, and I mentioned it, was almost real-time adjustments of forecast. So, there is some element of like making sure the targets and goals that you're setting are realistic and are achievable, or have that right balance of stretch versus achievable. Now, real time may be an overstatement, right? But being realistic about how those goals are set and flexing and adapting your forecasts and targets around the environment is one. The other thing, he did share is we are seeing and have seen a greater weight toward management by objective, so MBO. So what, are you doing the right things? Are you engaging, the right customers in the right way? Incentivizing things like peer-to-peer programs that Jay mentioned, incentivizing things like virtual activity, incentivizing collection of feedback from the physicians and accessibility information and things. So a bit more of a shift toward those management by objectives in times when, certainty around drug kind of direct sales themselves or TRXs may be harder to come by. Those were a couple of examples, but of course, lots more, to conversation on that topic.
Hey, Yash, I may, so I did see another question in there. Maybe I'll answer myself, and Judith, feel free to jump in. It's around like the things that we're talking about. What will happen in 2-3 years? Are they still going to be relevant or not? And I think Judith highlighted this right in the beginning. Like what we're seeing is really an advancement of trends we already saw in motion. So this is a movement and evolution of sales and marketing activities to be more personalized, to drive more engagement, focusing more on this concept of demand gen. That's where a lot of these concepts come from. We were already going there prior to COVID. This was the path we were heading down, and there'll be more virtual engagement, more remote engagement. But of course, without COVID, it would have happened slower. There'd also be a lot more in person to dovetail with it. So we think post-COVID, a lot of these things will continue. So if you make investments in these kinds of activities, these kinds of capabilities, these things will serve you well, even post-COVID, which is hopefully soon, right? We can all get back to doing what we want to do. But likely it'll take a different form, right? It'll be more in person again, but it'll be a better balance between in person and a lot of these virtual and remote engagement kind of tactics and approaches.
Got it. I think that's all the time we have. Lena, I'll turn it over to you for the closing.
All right, thank you everybody for joining us. As I mentioned, we will be sending an email with a link to this on-demand recording and a copy of the deck. As you see on the screen, Jay and Judith have provided their email addresses for you to reach out for more details. And thank you again for joining us.